For a long time, we've strongly associated video games with men, and there's good reason for that. If you look at the traditional video games, the traditional big budget so-called AAA titles, and this is still the case today, they really are focused at a male demographic, and you can tell by the kind of content that's included. It's very combat oriented, it's very power oriented, and it hits stereotypical male interests in a very significant way. The great thing about the video game world, however, since I would say at least 2000, is that there's an economic space now for a diversification of titles. And what we're seeing now is a tremendous experimentation with video game themes and play styles and artistic styles and all kinds of other things like that. And we're seeing games now that probably wouldn't have been economically feasible 10 or 15 years ago. There's always been a space in video games for different style of play. I know that being a North American gamer, I didn't pay a lot of attention to Japanese games growing up, but I know that Japanese games have always been a space for a different kind of gamer than the traditional North American fare. But I think that in the last 10 years, that's really blossomed, and that kind of difference has diversified and opened up to a lot of different areas. So what we're seeing now is that a lot of women are getting involved in games, and that is especially true in terms of playing. So we have a lot of games that appeal to stereotypically feminine interests, and we also have a lot of games that don't necessarily appeal to any stereotypical gendered interests, but are really open to just about anyone who's playing. Where we're still seeing a real lack is women in the game industry, and survey after survey has demonstrated that the employment rates of women in the industry is really quite pathetically low. But I also think that women are becoming more conscious of their role in the game industry, and we're starting to see some real concentrated cultural push on that front. And I have great hopes that in the near future we're going to start to see sizable numbers of women in the industry and making a significant impact in the kind of games that are actually being made and marketed as well. Traditional video games tend to exploit women rather than respect them, to be perfectly honest. There's a very limited set of roles that women characters can play in traditional video games. If you look at content analysis of video games, where they count things, the representations of women, the number of women, first of all, what's incredible is how few women show up in video games at all, the big budget titles especially. And when they do appear, they tend to have very minor roles. Even in those minor roles, they tend to play the role of decoration more than anything else. They are typically represented in a very hypersexualized fashion that very clearly appeals to heterosexual men. The traditional video game roles that were available to women were either sort of as a princess, a prize that a man could win for being successful in a game, or a sexual danger, or some kind of hysterical problem case. And it's been a very long time that those kind of roles have been dominant in the video game culture. We saw some diversification with the appearance of warrior women, Lara Croft and roles like that, but even then there's sort of this give and take going on simultaneously. On the one hand, women are allowed to do something other than be passive, but at the same time they have to be eye candy for men. And so you get Lara Croft, who is this incredibly active and powerful woman, but she's kind of dressed like a swimsuit model. In fact, literally she is sometimes in some of the representations of her. I think that's starting to shift. In fact, if you were to look for it all through the history of video games, you could find different representations of women. They just weren't really common. They weren't really the big budget standard kind of approach. But now we're starting to see representations of women that are more complicated. They don't have to be dressed up like a stripper to be in a game. And I think that there's some really good signs that video game culture is changing as the video game industry realizes that a good chunk of their buying demographic now is women and girls as well. And so we're starting to see some shift in that, where some greater respect for the role of women in games as well.